Is this a rogue court?
This is not a normal court.
All right, I've got my trusty, get this here, my trusty portable bench. I'm at a farm for a country wedding in the Eastern Townships. There was rehearsal today, so I snuck out to do this video. It's Supreme Court decision time in the United States of America, and the Supreme Court came down with a few rulings today that have caused shockwaves in the Democrat political world, the blue checkmark Twitterverse, and the MSM propagandist talking heads at fake news media. Mehdi Hassan, I'm getting to you in a second. Three decisions that I'm going to talk about today. We'll talk about them in greater detail Sunday night with Barnes during our weekly live stream Law Sunday night extravaganza. The Harvard admissions process, which discriminated against Asian students for the benefit of black students, struck down 6-3 along party lines as it goes in the Supreme Court. And it's as though people, I'm talking, political hacks like Pete Buttigieg, want to tolerate discrimination under certain circumstances and then condemn discrimination, which is actually non-discrimination, in other circumstances, which will lead us into the second case of the Christian web developers who refused to put up a website specifically for same-sex marriage on the basis that they don't believe in it, they believe it's wrong, and they don't want to partake in it. They were victorious in their case, and then we're going to get into the third case. Joe Biden, his executive order, just, writing off student debt in the orders of billions of dollars with the stroke of a pen, unconstitutional because he never had that power in the first place to follow through on that dishonest, disingenuous promise he made to try to buy votes for the election. All right, we're getting ahead of ourselves. 6-3 ruling declaring the Harvard admissions process unlawful in that it was discriminatory against Asians for the benefit of African American students. And you read this decision, it's impossible that anybody who reads it does not agree with the majority decision. They go through the history of the, I forgot I had a scrunchie on. They go through the history of decisions that created the precedent for affirmative action. And they go through one of the decisions, I think it's called Grutter, which said, okay, fine, affirmative action might be justifiable if it's, specific enough to right certain historical wrongs, but at some point it has to end. And that decision, I think it was a 25 years, they said, should be good enough. And that 25 years ends in 2028, which was one of the arguments of the university to say, look, this prior decision set a time frame, and we're not yet at the end of that time frame in that decision. The decision astutely observes that this policy in admissions casts a shadow over the heads, over the souls of black students at Harvard. They said something like, this factor went into the admission, race went into the admission as a tipping point thing in the admissions for virtually all black students in the university. Imagine what type of shame that might create, or imposter syndrome that might create for any of the black students at Harvard who say, did I get in because I deserved it, or did I get in because my race was a tipping point, and that's what they based their decision on. They say that no, at some point it has to end. They went after Harvard in particular because they said, look, there's not even any measurable criteria to justify this type of discrimination. We don't know how you're measuring it. We don't know when it ends. We don't know what the results are, if it's even yielding whatever results you want. And they said, no, it's a no-go. But when people are coming out now saying, oh my goodness, this is the end of the world for black students. By the way, this account, Emily, what's her face? Emily Marsh? You'd think it was a parody account with the outright, offensively, objectively racist things that some people are saying. Emily Marsh in particular comes out with a tweet and says, great, now because of this ruling, blacks are never going to be able to succeed on their own merits. I mean, it's crazy stuff. And you read the responses to this ruling, and you kind of do get the impression that affirmative action was something of a method of retaining power over African students, black students. When you look at it, and you see the way people are responding now, and they're saying, this group will never succeed on their own merits. They need me to help them succeed, and now they're never going to do it. That might be a little confession through projection of racism as it goes, as if to say, you think that black students cannot succeed on their own merit, or that if you're in power, they wouldn't succeed on their own merit, but for having affirmative action laws in place. It's a lot of confession through projection. But the things people are saying right now, it does lead me to believe that even the idea of affirmative action is sort of a pet project way of one group, the dominant group, of retaining moral, legislative power over the dominated group under the pretext that we're doing it to ensure your success, because if it were up to me, you would never succeed. All right. But the problem is this: for everybody saying that this decision is the end of the world for black students, it's as though they didn't read a portion of that decision which says, look, you can't have it that race is a determinate element of the admissions process, but on an individual basis. If you have essays as part of the admissions process, you can listen to someone's life story and determine that race, elements of their identity, might be relevant in assessing their character for the purposes of admission. It's like people didn't read this part of the judgment, which it might be, in a cynical way, a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Some members of the court saying, here's what you can do indirectly that we just forbade directly. Have them explain their life story. And I don't think it's a terrible idea. People who have gotten through adversity, people who have succeeded despite all odds. Yeah, it might be an indication of character on an individual basis. But to go through it on a collective basis and say that race is going to be the determinate element for admissions, that's discrimination. It's discrimination that the left wants to tolerate while simultaneously purporting to be outraged that, discrimination has just been authorized in this Christian web development website decision, which it hasn't. The Pete Buttigeg's of the world are saying, oh my, discrimination is terrible. Now these private businesses have been authorized by the Supreme Court of the United States to ratify, sanction, tolerate discrimination. They're not going to serve same-sex couples anymore. Read the flipping decision, Buttigieg et al. That's not what the decision says. It's not what the cake baking one said either. What this decision said is that even if you are a business open to the public, if the service that you offer is interrelated to your First Amendment rights, think about the services of offering cameos. Those things where you read a happy birthday to somebody if they pay you $50 or whatever. I think it's called cameo. When your business is interrelated with First Amendment considerations, like a lawyer taking a case, I'm not going to say something in a case that I don't believe in or that I believe is offensive. This service offered by the web developer had a component which was just offered to the public. You want a template of a website? You want a computer? Here it is. You want me to draft specific wording on a website? That involves my First Amendment rights. And to the extent that it does, I cannot be compelled to speak that which I do not believe in. And so the same-sex couples didn't just want a template, generic blog-type website. They wanted this Christian web developer to put out a specific message for same-sex marriage. Not a template, not a boilerplate, not, just off the shelf. Something custom that would compel that web developer to say something with his own thoughts, with his own mind, that he did not believe in. And the court said, no. It's not because you're open to the public that the public can come in and say, dance for me, say what I want you to say, even if you don't believe in it, because then that violates my First Amendment rights. So there's no discrimination in that the web developer said, same-sex marriages, get out. Same-sex couples, I'm not even selling you a template website. It said simply, you cannot compel someone whose services are open to the public to say something, to speak something that they do not believe in. Much like even the people who sell the cameos for $50 a pop, you want to get that person to say something that they don't believe in or that's offensive, and they say no, you don't get to claim discrimination, because it's not discrimination that you cannot compel someone else to say something that goes against their beliefs. All right. And the people framing it that way are ignorant, dishonest, or both. Speaking of which, Mehdi Hasan comes out today and says, oh, what the tragedy that this rogue Supreme Court of the United States of America overrode Joe Biden's promise to write off student debt. You remember he made that promise back in the day. We're going to write off student debt, a certain portion of it, and invoking pandemic law, invoking crises law to say, because of the crisis, we're just writing off, $10,000, $20,000 of your student debt, just like that. Mehdi Hasan comes out and says, oh my goodness, this rogue, he didn't say the word extremist, that was Elizabeth Warren. Mehdi Hasan says, this rogue Supreme Court overriding, usurping the power of the president in this horrible decision, and now students are all going to suffer. Mehdi, it was your propagandist news network. It was actually CNBC, not MSNBC, but I think they're all owned by the same NBC peacock crap. Their own network reported at the time that Nancy Pelosi had come out and said, he does not have the power to do this. Joe Biden does not have the power to do this. Everyone who knew anything at the time says Joe Biden does not have the power through executive order to do what the legislative branch is supposed to do by way of legislation. You want to write off student debt? Take it to Congress, write some laws, and pass it. The problem was, even back then, it wasn't even clear that they had the majority that was required in order to pass this through the legislative process, so they bypassed the law entirely. Joe Biden makes a promise that he had no business making, that he knew he could not make. That's called a lie, by the way. Saying you're going to do something that you know you cannot do, you do not have the lawful authority to do, but it'll take a bit of time for that to come out, as it did. But in the meantime, you go buy some votes of some ignorant students who say, yes, Joe Biden's going to let me write off my student debt, even though he knows it cannot be done. Pelosi knew it could not be done. And lo and behold, the Supreme Court came out and said, no, you can't do it. And it too is the right decision. But these propagandists want to create outrage where there is no outrage. They want to uphold double standards, mutually incompatible thoughts at the same time. Discrimination is good when it's for affirmative action. It's bad when it's for a Christian web developer who cannot be compelled to say something. And yep, it's the Supreme Court's fault that Joe Biden can't follow through on his unlawful promises that he knew were unlawful at the time, that he did nonetheless. He said nonetheless, because he's a liar trying to exploit the ignorance of his base, as is Mehdi Hassan, and they're trying to miseducate, misinform everybody so that people are whipped up into a faux outrage, thinking they had their rights taken away from them when they didn't, because they never had those rights in the first place, thinking there's discrimination where there isn't, and then thinking that discrimination where there is somehow justifiable. That's it. All right, now I'm going back to the rehearsal. I'm going to put my hair in a samurai ponytail, and I will see you all Sunday. Booyah. Nope, hold on. Gotta take my chair back.